welcome to Decker's Nursery. Today we're going to talk about selecting a tree, and we're actually going to take time and I'm going to show you how to plant a tree. So that's a very general statement because there are so many choices along the way. So hopefully I'm going to give you information that's going to help you decide what type of tree to plant and how to plant it. So we're going to talk about all the different components it takes, but for now I wanted to start with selecting the tree. Okay, I'm standing in front of a mid-age Styrax japonica, or a Styrax tree. It's one of my favorite late blooming ornamental trees. It has very good width on it, and I decided to use a tree that that flowers later in the season because there's so many early blooming trees. So this is a way to give yourself some flowering later when you tend to be outside more. So there's a certain place for every spring flowering tree, but I wanted to turn you on to some of the later blooming trees, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So today we're going to talk about selecting the trees, and we're going to take a little walk through the nursery. I'm actually going to show you how to move the trees. Okay, so one of the things we want to make available to our customers going forward is to rent equipment. So there's certain tools that will make the actual planting process easier for you so that you can either do it yourself, or you can always have the option of allowing us to do the planting for you. The next thing we'll talk about is choosing the right location for a tree, and there's several factors that go into that. And then we're actually going to plant a tree, and I'm going to show you some of the pitfalls and the reasons that people aren't successful after planting a tree. So hopefully a little bit later you're going to feel very confident. All of us know the significance and the importance of planting trees. It's the primary reason that I opened Decker's Nursery, and I wholeheartedly feel the more trees we plant, the more benefit and improvements and enhancements we make to our environment. Okay, let's go for a walk through the nursery. It's the month of July. It's very warm. A lot of people are hesitant to plant at this time of year because it is so hot. So I can tell you that Decker's Nursery plants 12 months out of the year. So we're going to think like a tree for a moment. When it's hot, and this year is the anomaly because it's been raining so much, but usually in the summer we have less rainfall. So if you were a tree and you're getting less precipitation and there's less moisture in the soil, how are you going to respond to that? You're going to put more roots out. So we're actually at a time in the year when the trees are developing a lot of their root system that's going to support it through the rest of this year and into next year. So this is actually an ideal time of year to plant a tree. I stopped here in the nursery because I wanted to show you all of the planting practices and the plant selection process pertains to shrubs as well. So right now in the month of July, all the hydrangeas are blooming profusely. So you're going to take all these tips I give you today and you can just use them to plant shrubs as well. And we're going to be doing more of these videos talking about the selection of shrubs. So that'll help you as well. But you know, I just wanted to stop for a moment and share the hydrangeas that are just beautiful this year. So we're going to start talking about the choices you want to make in selecting a tree. So I wanted to stop at the biggest tree we have in the nursery right now. This is a 3.5-inch Stewardia, not a Styrax, a Stewardia. And this has big, large white individual flowers that come out now in the month of July. This is another late blooming tree to consider if you're trying to get flowers around the pool area or in areas that you tend to spend time outside. So it is practical to plant a tree this size, but you're not going to be able to do that on your own. We would have to use special equipment to move this and locate it and to actually put it into the ground for you. But this is a magnificent tree I thought I should share with you. When we talk about selecting a tree, the dichotomous key that we use, you primarily start with whether you want to plant an evergreen or a deciduous tree. Deciduous trees lose their leaves at the end of the year in November. Think about why you're planting the tree. Is it for aesthetics? Then a flowering tree may be more suited to that. If you're planting to get privacy or screening, you may want to use an evergreen that gives you privacy year-round. So neither one of those are absolute. Both types of trees can give you screening, and both types of trees are beautiful and aesthetically appealing in their own right. So that's the first decision you want to make, and I'll show you some more evergreens. Behind us we have one of the beautiful new mini twist pine trees. So these are dwarf evergreens that won't get overly large, and they're a lot of fun, but you can see they're aesthetically appealing, but also would give you some privacy or could hide an air conditioning unit or something like that. Okay. The next part of the selection process is going to deal with the size of the tree. Okay, so you do want to have an idea whether you're planting in a sunny location or a shade location. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but let's just go under the assumption that we have an ideal situation. So we're going to start thinking in the terms of the size of the tree that we want to plant. So trees come in all different sizes. This is a weeping cherry tree that'll grow to 20 feet tall and 20 foot wide. It's a smaller, younger tree to start with, but very easy to manage and very easy to plant. So this tree will teach you patience, but it's going to become as grand and large as some of the big weeping cherries you see throughout our community. Okay, what I wanted to point out is these trees are planted in containers, or so we call them container trees, and they come in different size containers. We have 25-gallon, 30-gallon. These are 15-gallon trees I'm standing next to. I'm sorry, 10-gallon and 15-gallon trees. So our biggest selling containerized tree is usually the 15-gallon, and it's because you're getting a substantial size tree to start with. Like, it's something you'll enjoy immediately, but it's still manageable in size. So this is something that most homeowners can move with a wheelbarrow, or a couple men just holding each side and moving it into a couple people, men or women, moving it into the desired location. So that's part of the second component of your selection process. And of course, you're going to start looking at the cost of the trees at this point, depending on what your budget is. And one advice I would give you after helping customers for 15 years selecting trees, try to work with a budget. Try to stay in your budget. Make the planting of a tree fun. So I think what happens a lot is people get here and they see the larger tree and the budget goes out the window, and then there might be a little remorse for that. So this should be a real fun thing to do, something that you enjoy long after the process is completed. So at this point, you'll start looking at some of the pricing on the trees as well to help with your decision making. I'm standing next to a multi-stem crepe myrtle that's balled and burlapped, okay, or we call it B&B, all right? So this is the alternative to buying trees in a container. These are the two primary ways that trees are packaged for resale at a garden center. Okay, and you can see that these are dug out of the ground with equipment or machines, and then they lace the root system with burlap and decomposable sisal to hold the root ball together. So you want to understand the roots are under there, so you want to treat these carefully. You don't want to drop it off a truck or bang it on the ground with a tool, because you're going to do damage to the root systems. As the roots go, so goes the tree. So in a container, you can see it's a lot smaller or less heavy. You're getting more of a root system with a balled and burlap tree, and that always gives you more value. What you're buying at this stage is the root system of the tree, because that's what's going to support and sustain the life of the tree. Okay, so just to recap, you have containerized trees in all different sizes, pretty much from 3-gallon up to 30-gallon, and then we have balled and burlap trees, and that can be for any size tree, and this is the most common way to prepare trees for market. I'm going to show you how to plant both types of trees so that you feel comfortable in either decision you make, but I'm going to reiterate, whenever you buy a balled and burlap tree, you get much better value, because that tree is going to be more self-sustaining than a containerized tree at the start, okay? Something to keep in mind, when these trees are in the garden center, they're missing 90% of their root system. Okay, they can survive that. We're going to talk more about that. This is very important. We have to compensate for the loss of that root tissue by taking care of these trees for the first 18 months or 2 years. And we'll talk about that after I finish planting a tree for you. Okay, so this gives you some things to think about when you're selecting the tree. Now, the other considerations are how the tree appears, when it blooms, what the size of the tree is going to be, what the mature size of the tree is going to be, both height and width. Is it a multi-stem tree, or do you want to plant a single-stem tree that tends not to get as broad? Different colored foliage, like this beech tree has burgundy foliage, so it's a nice contrast throughout the year. Matt's going to turn around and get a picture of a purple plum that we have at the far end of the nursery, and you'll see how it stands out just because of the contrasting colors. So these are all things that you want to start considering, as well as when it blooms and what the flowers look like. Don't fall into the trap of falling in love with a tree just because it's in flower. Most trees will flower for 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the weather. So some years you may get 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. Some years, like in the past several years, we've had 8 to 9 weeks of flowering on the cherry trees, because it's been cool temperatures in the early part of the year. So, okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is how we move these trees from the nursery yard to where you want to plant it. So I mentioned earlier that we are going to make equipment available for rent to move these trees, and I'm going to have a couple of my employees show you how to move the trees. And these are things that you can coordinate and organize yourself if you're inclined to do so. All right, so I've asked for a little help from 2 of my long-term employees, Baxter and Joe, and they're going to actually use this ball cart, okay? And this is the equipment that we're going to make available to you. We have different sizes, so this is the largest one we have. We can move almost anything that's in the nursery with this size ball cart. You can also use these to move containerized trees. So we talked about using a wheelbarrow earlier, but if you feel more comfortable, this equipment is designed to move trees without damaging them. So I'm going to ask Joe and Baxter, they're going to move one of the larger balled and burlap trees, and they'll just show you the technique so that you feel comfortable in doing that yourself. So they work as a team. They've done hundreds of these, so it's kind of routine for them. But they tip the ball forward. You want to get that front lip under the root ball, and then Baxter was able to just pull that out back by himself. So most often we always have two people just for safety, and you can see how easily that transports, and then you can just wheel that into your backyard. That'll go through almost any size gate, and they can actually even go up a couple of stairs as long as the stairs are wide enough. Okay, so you see how easy that is. And then another thing to keep in mind while you're staging the tree for planting, try to keep it propped up so it's not falling over. The root balls don't always have a flat bottom to stand straight up. So if it's a windy day, you want to make sure it's propped so it's not falling over repetitively. Okay, and then I asked them to just move one of the containerized trees. So again, it's the same technique. They're just going to lean it forward, get the tongue underneath, and then pull the tree back together, and it's a very simple process. Okay, it's a good idea to use this instead of a wheelbarrow because it's designed to support the weight, and you're less likely to break a stem, to break a branch, and definitely don't want to do any damage to the root ball. So hopefully this is enough information to allow you to feel comfortable in doing this planting process by yourself. Okay, so in the selection process, we talked about choosing a deciduous tree. That's always a great idea. You also have the option of planting evergreens. So we try to keep a really large selection of different sizes and different species of evergreens, whether it's the eastern red cedar, which is a popular native tree, the eastern white pine, another native evergreen. Both of these are good for screening in harsh conditions if you're next to the water. The popular trees now for screening are the leyland cypress, the cryptomeria, and at the end of this aisle, we have a magnificent Myers blue spruce. And if you see the size of the root ball on that, that's something that 2 or 3 men can move by themselves. Right? Yep. Okay, so we've spent a little time talking about selecting your tree. We've talked about how you're going to move the tree. Remember, we can deliver the trees to your property, and then you have the equipment to move it into place, or you can, do it all yourself if we can help with that. The next component of planting a tree is choosing the right location. Okay, so welcome to my backyard. I selected an area of the yard where I still have a little bit of room left, and we're going to plant the smaller version of the styrax that we looked at the beginning of the video. So this tree will become the same tree that I showed you earlier, and we're going to use a containerized tree to start with. As it pertains to the location, this is a spot in my backyard that has morning shade and afternoon sun. It has more than 6 hours of sun, so that's considered full sun. All right, so whenever you have a combination of sun and shade, that's ideal. Very few plants like to be in the sun all day, the same way we wouldn't want to be in the sun all day. So I have ideal growing conditions for a styrax tree to grow and mature. As it matures and becomes larger, it may compete with the adjacent trees, and we can address that with pruning. So this tree will never interfere with the other trees as long as I maintain it and provide the pruning that's needed. And that's a whole different topic that we'll talk about. But as for the light, I'm within shot of the water source. I'm able to get water to this tree without much work, and that's something you should consider, because you have to water this tree for the first entire growing season, and then part of the following or subsequent season, you're going to need to get water to the tree, whether it's using a bucket or getting a hose out. Okay, so the location, you should consider how you're going to get water to the tree as well as the light and the amount of space that you have, okay? Ideally, this tree would go out a little bit further away from the other trees, but for for this, the purpose of this video, we're going to use it in this location for now. So Baxter's going to help me a little bit more. We've started to prepare the planting pit. So this is as simple as digging a hole. What I wanted to start with is the tools that you're going to want to use and have ready for when you start your planting process. So of course you're going to need a shovel. Any shovel will do. If you're planting near large trees, you may encounter some roots. You're going to need a good sturdy shovel to cut through those roots. The other tool that most people forget is to use a mattock, okay? And this is used to start the hole, and Baxter's going to display this in a moment. But you're going to want to have a mattock available to you. The other tools I have for now is I carry a utility planting knife. You'll see how I use this in a little bit. I have compost available. We're going to show you how to use the compost. And I have the starter fertilizer that we're going to apply at the end, okay? So these are the tools needed to plant a tree. You can see we've started the planting pit. The thing you want to keep in mind is the hole should be twice as wide as the root ball. So if you have a large B&B tree, you need to go out a little bit, or like twice the width of that root mass. Because what you're doing is you're creating a conducive environment for the roots to grow into. And that's your primary concern for the first year of the tree. You want to get the roots developed. So, Baxter, would you show us how you're going to make that hole wider? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you can use this. The soil in my yard is horrendous. It's very rocky. It's a lot of fill was added to it. You can see the color. It has good dark, which means there's organic matter in there. But cutting through that turf and then dealing with some of the larger stones, very often a shovel won't be enough. So the mattock's very useful at expediting that. So after he makes that a little bit wider, we're going to start to prepare the tree. Okay, you see how the turf comes out in large pieces? So that's not something you want to use when you're backfilling the hole. And I'll show you how to handle that. Okay, so why don't we just get that excess soil out of there. So this gives you an idea how wide the hole should be before you get ready to put the tree in it. One other thing to consider when you're preparing the planting pit or the planting hole is the depth of the hole should be no deeper than the container or the root ball. In fact, it should be slightly less deep than the container. So this is where the top of the tree is going to be the top of the grade. Okay, so we're going to plant our trees just slightly higher. So that seems to concern a lot of people. We'll talk about why that's so important as I expose the tree and take it out of the container. Okay, so this is a good thing to do with two people. Always pull the pot off of the tree. Okay? Hand me the planting knife. Okay. So there's protective covering on the tree so it's not damaged during transportation. The roots, as you can see, have grown in a circular pattern all the way around the shape of the container. So we want to loosen those roots, and this is what the planting knife is for. We're actually going to make vertical cuts all the way down the root ball because we want them to grow out radially. if we don't do this, the roots will continue to grow in a circular pattern, and that can actually kill the tree years later. Sometimes it's 15, 20 years later, but there's no need to leave them like that. And you can see I'm being a little assertive here. I mean, I'm cutting these roots pretty aggressively. That doesn't concern me. Most people think that they're doing damage to the tree, but what we're doing is we're setting the tree up to be successful for the life of the tree, for 100 years. So, okay. And this is a good reason to have a second person helping you. You know, Baxter's able to support the tree, prevent it from getting damaged. If I was working by myself, I'd be breaking branches on there. Okay, so this gives you a good idea how much force you can use on these roots. So 90% of the roots are in the top foot of the root ball, okay? And they don't grow like carrots. They don't grow down. They want to grow out radially, okay? So that's why that planting depth is so important. Baxter, stand that up. The next thing you want to pay attention to, so I'm going to prune this off at some point, but I want to find the root flare, okay? At the base of every tree, there's a flare where the roots and the trunk meet. There should be a flare, okay? And that flare should always be visible. And that's the part of the tree that has to be above grade. So we're going to remove the protective covering so I can work on the tree a little bit easier. Always be careful not to damage the tree as you're opening it. Okay, there should be pruners on the table over there if you could grab them. Okay, so I'm starting to see the root flare after exposing an inch or so. So very often trees will come in and the root collar will be covered with soil. That's most noted on bald and burlap trees. And it's just something during the process where they throw excessive soil onto the top of the root ball. Okay, we prune the basal growth off of this so we can see the root flare. And that basal growth is usually an indicator that there's a little bit of soil overburden over the flare. So, Matt, are you able to zoom in on that? And you can see I'm starting to identify the flare of the tree. So this is actually the base. So there's going to be a little bit of roots above the soil line, and you can remove that. Okay, so this may seem a little excessive in preparation, but I'm going to tell you this is the #1 reason that trees don't survive beyond 7 years. If you don't pay attention to the planting depth, the tree won't let you know that there's a problem for maybe a decade. And then somebody will come out and say, yes, the tree was planted too deep. And even just a few inches can make a big difference in how well the tree performs. So you do want to find the root flare. And this is one of the other reasons that I started the nursery. This is so evident on almost every landscape. I see trees that are planted too deep. And the tree gets an insect or it gets a disease. And we can almost always trace it back to how it was planted and how the tree was cared for. So this is something, at this stage, this is the best time to correct the root collar disorder. So this tree was in really really good condition. I just removed a little bit of soil and I'm able to see the root flare. So when we plant this tree, we want to make sure it's above ground. This tissue is supposed to stay dry, and if it's below ground, you're going to get insects and diseases get in through that tissue. So very important. I can't emphasize it enough, and you'll see as we set it in here and complete the backfill process, we're going to make sure that stays above ground. So Baxter, can you set that in? Okay. All right.
Deeper.
A lot of people like to measure the depth and then measure the hole, and in this case we're going to go a little bit deeper. Okay, there is a slight mound. We could plant this tree and it would be fine, but I want to make sure that you have all the information you need to be successful. You can see how difficult this soil is. Okay. All right. So we went down just a couple of inches, made the hole deeper, and that appears to be ideal. So I'm not sure if the camera will pick this up, but we're sitting right at grade, just like an inch or two above grade. So first thing on the backfill, I don't want to backfill with the grass. What I do, I take my planting knife, just take a little bit, and throw the grass to the side. If you backfill with this, you'll very often get like air pockets in the backfill, and you don't want that. I'm sorry, what?
Do you want some of this compost in there?
Oh, yeah, thank you. So Baxter just reminded me, it's very important that we amend the soil with compost, okay? So we recommend the Espoma Organic Garden Soil. We also carry a line of the Hampton Estate compost. Both of them are putting organic matter into the soil, and that's going to support the health of the tree. So what we do is we mix half of the soil that came out of the hole, we mix another 50% with compost. So we have compost here that we make on site with decomposed wood chips, so we're going to use that for today, but I wanted to show you the product that we recommend you use. So you want to mix that up, yes, Baxter? Okay, so don't backfill with straight compost, okay? Make sure you're using the native soil because the roots are going to go out into that. Once they get to the edge of the planting pit, the soil, if you use all compost, the roots aren't going to leave the compost. So you would actually be creating another container almost where the roots grow in a circular pattern. We don't want that. We want a condition where the roots are encouraged to go out into the native soil, and they will figure out how to survive, and as long as you're caring for the tree, it's going to do well. So you just add the compost to your backfill and just mix it up. Okay, and you can go any ratio between 25% and 50%. There's a new school of thought in recent years to use less compost to encourage the roots to go out, okay? I may be a little bit old school. I also know the soil here is lacking in organic matter, so it's very important that we add it, and it definitely helps with the transplant process, okay? Another thing that I want to point out when you're planting a tree, you need to learn patience, okay? First year, creep. Second year leap, second year creep, third year leap. First year sleep, second year creep, third year leap. In the third year, you will see this tree transform. Right now we have a little bit of terminal dieback. That's not a concern. It's just part of the tree getting too big for the container. So we can prune that out, and we try to leave all the viable tissue on the tree. So I don't want to cut any good leaves off. The leaves act as, they manufacture the photosynthates that drive the energy and the life cycle of the tree. So the more leaves you leave on the tree, the healthier it will be. Okay, pruning should not be done for any other reason except to take dead tissue out during the first 2 to 3 years a tree is installed. Okay. All right, this tree has really nice form. It's a single stem tree. It starts to branch out here. As it matures, I'll do some structural pruning on it. That's a different topic in itself, but this tree is set up to be very successful. Okay, Baxter's completed the backfill process. Okay, there's always going to be some extra soil around. What we do is we kind of spread that out beyond. So when you're preparing your planting pit, you always want to go wider instead of deeper. Another thing I do, after I install the tree, I take my shovel out to the edge and I start to loosen the soil beyond the root pit. So this actually makes the planting hole a little bit bigger, a little bit wider. Just the mechanical action of breaking up the soil allows the roots to work into that soil a little bit more readily. So, and you could go out as wide as you want, as wide as the... Okay, so that's a little tip to help increase the width of your planting pit. Okay, so at this point we have to get the soil to settle into the hole. We're going to use the hose to do that. So we're going to saturate this root ball. We're going to use probably about 10 gallons of water to saturate the entire root mass, and this will cause the soil to settle and identify any gaps or air pockets that we may have. Okay, so when you're watering a tree, you always want to saturate the root ball. Okay, so if you're planting a 15-gallon tree, it's a good idea to apply 10 to 15 gallons. If you're not sure how long to water to get 10 to 15 gallons, it's usually about 3 gallons a minute. Okay, so it would take you 5 minutes to water this tree. So there doesn't appear to be any settling, but what we're going to do is bring that excess soil up and around and fill the gaps around the side, just so it looks clean and finished. You can see the top inch of the root ball is kind of emerging above grade. That's okay. Don't let that concern you. We're going to cover that with mulch when we're all done here. Okay, the roots need oxygen. The majority of the oxygen is in the top few inches of soil. So by having some of those above ground, it doesn't compromise the tree in any manner. Okay, so I see the puddling. That means it's pretty saturated. Give that time to settle in. Okay. So now that the tree has been planted at the proper depth, with the proper amount of space for the roots to develop and sustain itself, it's pretty much cleaning up. So we've taken the excess soil and spread it out around the root ball. We got a little bit more over that little bit that was exposed above grade. The tree should mound down away from the stem slightly. You can edge your grass if you want to have that little divot in there. And Baxter's taken time to spread out some cedar mulch. We really advocate the use of the cedar mulch. It does a really good job of keeping the soil moist, and as it decomposes, it puts organic matter back into the soil. So one important thing to pay attention to when you spread your soil, the mulch is for the roots. It's not for the stem of the tree. You don't want to pile a lot of mulch against the base of the tree like I'm doing here. Okay, that keeps that root collar wet. So this is another common problem we see. So keep your mulch out over the root system and leave the root flare exposed. Okay? You try to make that look neat. You should use about 2 to 3 inches of mulch for it to do its job properly. Try not to have big clumps in one place. And you can see we say about 6 inches away from the base of the tree. So whenever we plant, this is how we install a tree. And now that you're aware of it, you're able to do this yourself as well. After your tree is planted and the mulch has been applied, we talked about how much water to apply to the tree. You should be doing that 2 or 3 times a week. So in the heat of summer, do it 3 times a week. The rest of the year, do it twice a week. Do not water every day. It doesn't allow the soil to drain out. We talked about how important oxygen is for the root system. So you want that soil to dry out in between waterings. After this process is completed, we have a really good product at the nursery that we advocate and recommend. It's Root and Grow. So it's high in phosphorus. It's formulated specifically for root development. And it's just as simple as taking 4 caps and adding it to 2 gallons of water. And then you just pour the water out, or the solution out, over the root system. Okay, and try to keep it up close to the root ball. Okay, this will help to stimulate root development. And as we said, as the roots go, so goes the tree. Okay, and if you just apply 2 gallons a week or every other week, that's going to help the tree and be beneficial. You should use the product. You can't over apply it unless you mix too much at one time. So remember, 4 caps for 2 gallons of water. If you're using a larger tree, you may end up doing 4 or 6 gallons of water. So, okay, if you take care of this tree, it'll be a benefit and an asset in your landscape for decades to come. Remember, we don't plant trees necessarily for our enjoyment and pleasure. We plant them for the next generation. I'll look forward to seeing you in the garden.